The speaking test, just like the writing test, is graded out of 20. In the oral expression test, or speaking, there are 3 tasks with a total duration of 12 minutes. The entire speaking test is recorded and evaluated by 2 independent certified examiners, one being the invigilator and the other from France Éducation Internationale, which is the organization that creates these TCF exams. In the first task, it is just yourself, the candidate, that will be speaking. The interviewer might help you out and ask a few questions if you look stuck. So the first question is basically to talk about yourself. What's your name? What do you do? Where do you live? What do you do in your free time? What are your hobbies? What are your interests? And so on and so forth. The goal is to keep talking until the timer beeps. The second task is a slightly more interactive exchange with the examiner about a specific topic. The objective of this task is to evaluate your ability to ask questions, respond, and exchange information. An example of a question would be, you're looking for an apartment, ask me questions to find out about if this is right for you. When you're looking for an apartment, there are some obvious questions you would ask to find out more information about the potential place you would like to rent. What's the price? Where's the location? Is it close to a bus stop? Are utilities included? So even if you're just asking questions, you have to make sure that your questions are structured and you do not have as many ums as possible. You have to fill those blank spaces. You want to make sure that your questions do not sound like they were memorized and you're just reading them out. Think of it as a conversation. Yes, it might be a challenging moment because you're speaking to a stranger, but you have to make your speech flow. So instead of asking questions like, what is the price? Where's the location? Is it close to a bus stop? Think of it as a conversation. Hi, nice to meet you. My name is, and I saw your apartment online and I'm interested. I just wanted to find out about the price as well as its proximity to the bus stop. So in French, just like in English, you want to look at using transitional statements as well as, for example, such that your speech sounds like a conversation, not just questions you memorized. When it comes to task 2 questions, you will be given time to prepare, for example, 2 minutes. So you could write down a list of questions you would like to ask the examiner and then ask them. But of course, you have to make sure that the questions you ask flow like a conversation. And then when it comes to task 3, there is no preparation time, so you should be able to just talk spontaneously. The objective of task 3 questions is to justify your point of view, convince the examiner by defending your position in a structured and logical manner. An example of a question would be, do you think phones should be used in school? When it comes to these types of questions, obviously, the more you practice before the test, the higher your advantage. So you can practice speaking with a conversational partner, a tutor, or even speaking alone. So an ideal structure of a question like this would be 1, your point of view. In my point of view, I believe phones should not be allowed in schools. Your reason? This is because phones can be distracting to students. And now justifying your reason. For example, if students are scrolling through social media in class instead of paying attention to their teachers, they might miss out on important information which could affect their final grade. You could elaborate by giving an example. If the instructor is giving tips on how to succeed in the upcoming test and a student is scrolling through funny memes on social media, they would miss out on that information, which would highly affect their grade. You could go on to give further reasons to further convince the examiner. At times, the media consumed by students might not be educational. You could also add a counterpoint to further develop your argument. However, this is not to say that phones are completely negative in an educational setting. With access to the internet, students can still be able to do research for their projects, and a conclusion to finalize your speech. All in all, I believe the use of phones should be banned from the educational system, and then you can further develop your conclusion to make it as convincing as possible. So to sum it up, Task 1 questions test your ability to talk about yourself, your name, where you live, what you do, etc. Task 2 generally tests your ability to ask for information, and Task 3 to give your opinion, develop an argument, and convince the examiner. So the speaking test is scored on several criteria. As you're speaking, the invigilator would have a piece of paper with a list of criteria and a scale of, say, 1 to 5 of how well you met each of those criteria. Things you will be evaluated for in the speaking test. Obviously, your ability to follow instructions and provide the required information, as well as answer the questions fully. Another criteria you will be tested on is your ability to speak in an organized and structured manner. What helps with this is by using transitional statements like d'abord, en premier lieu, puis, prochainement, en conclusion, etc., etc. These transitional words help your speech to flow more smoothly and make them more understandable. They also help with making your ideas flow more easily. And then the last tip would be pronunciation and intonation. Is your pronunciation understandable? Of course, you don't need to sound like a native. You just have to be clear and understandable. So try to speak slowly and clearly such that your message is passed through. It also gives you enough time to think about what you're going to say. And finally, we'll look at tips to excel in the speaking test. Speak, speak, speak. Find native speakers to practice the following tips with. If you don't have access to native speakers, make recordings of yourself and listen back to correct any mistakes. You can also use AI to your advantage. There are some speech-enabled AI like Meta AI and Copilot that have French language settings that could help you in your speaking journey. Try as much as possible to avoid long pauses and hesitations. Long silences and will make you lose points. Instead of hesitating, you could use French filler words like alors, en fait, je pense que, or the French alternative to make your speech sound more fluid and continuous. So try as much as possible to practice beforehand so that you know what you are going to say. Before the test, practice speaking and presenting different subjects in a clear, detailed, and structured manner in a style that's appropriate to the context of the question, using the order introduction, point of view, reasons, conclusion, etc., etc. Of course, this can be modified to a way that works best for you, but you just want to make sure that they are as structured and organized as possible. You could also use transitional statements like d'abord, premièrement, deuxièmement, ainsi, donc, to help you keep on track. The more you practice speaking and venturing into new conversation topics, the calmer you will be while speaking to a stranger in a foreign language. Sometimes having a second person might help us catch on mistakes we never knew we had. Practice talking about yourself, about your family, about your job, about your life. Practice asking for information about different things, asking for directions, asking about an event. Practice debates, giving your opinion and explaining the advantages and disadvantages of a plan. Express agreement and disagreement.